We're back in the software and you see our schematic before you. I'd now like to show you the layout of the schematic. There are a couple ways to get to a schematic layout. The first one is to go to the left where the schematic is in the project browser, My Stub, right-click View Layout. You'll notice there's also an icon, a little bend, or I seem to call it the elbow, up in the toolbars, whichever one you want, and I click on that and I bring up the layout, and I'm sure you're saying that doesn't look like a stub to me. I'm going to go ahead and pull these elements apart, and it's starting to look a little bit more like a stub. Remember that the reason we have both schematic and layout is a schematic is not a layout. It has no idea how you want the elements rotated and their placement. The red lines are connection lines, or we tend to call them rat lines in our software, show you how the elements are connected in the schematic. Now I'm going to go ahead here and hit my V button, my hotkey, so that I can show you the layout and the schematic at the same time. When I click on an element in the schematic, notice that it highlights as red in the layout. If I click on an element in the layout, we get a green X through the element in the schematic. Green X here is not bad, it just simply means that's the selected element. So in this case I have selected the stub. If you want to know what you have selected, you can look down here at the lower left of the software and notice in this case we have picked an MLEF. When I'm in the layout, I can do a number of things. Now for example here, the first thing I'm going to do is snap everything together. I select all, Control A, standard Microsoft Windows key, and I go up to the top and I see this little red arrow on the left called Snap Together. I click on that and indeed I've snapped together the layout. Maybe we want that rotated, so I do a Control A, right click, rotate, and I can rotate the layout, hit the home key, it all becomes visible. Incidentally, as in a little aside to help you with layout, if you have a wheel on your mouse, if you wheel up and down, the layout will go up and down. Shift layout, it will go left and right, and Control layout, it will zoom in and out. And again, the home key makes the whole layout appear in the window. What I'm now going to do is select this left line, and I actually double click, and if you notice you get some blue dots. Those are those drag handles. I can drag, make it wider. I can drag, make it shorter or longer. The numbers in the schematic for that element have immediately changed. Of course, if you change the numbers in the schematic, they change in layout. And so they're very tightly tied together. When you change one, the other has to change. Notice it has become disconnected again. You can see the little rat lines. Control A, snap together. Now, a couple of tips for you. First of all, notice we were using the MT $ element. And notice here that the T-junction has actually changed its width on the one side. As I promised, it is getting its values from its neighbors, recognizes the line on the left is wider, and therefore compensates. Of course, the model changes too. A couple of tips on snapping together. When you get a lot of elements in a real layout, 25, 30, 35 elements, you are not going to want to do Control A and then snap everything together, because everything will fly around, it could rotate, and you'll get frustrated. So let me show you a couple ways to control your layout a little bit better. First of all, you can select one element, like our MLIN, and a second element by holding down the Shift key. When I hit the Snap Together button, the second element moves to the first. So in this way, you can actually just two elements at a time start putting things together. I'm going to do a couple Control Z's to undo this. Another thing you can do is the following. I'm going to select the T. You always have to start with a left click in Layout. Then right click Shape Properties. And under Shape Properties, where my cursor is here, you'll see Freeze and Use for Anchor. If you select Use for Anchor, notice that the T gets a red X in it, which means it's an anchor. You can still move it, but when we do a Control A and snap together, it stays put. It's equivalent to selecting it first. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Another thing I can do, if I select the T, left click first, then Shape Properties, instead of Anchor, I can Freeze. And when you freeze, you get a blue diamond. And notice I cannot move it. I literally can't move it. If you froze all of these elements, even if you snap together, nothing will move. The only thing that can change when you've frozen an element is if you went into the schematic, changed widths, lengths, etc. It would have to change the shape of that element because they are schematic and layout are tied together. But otherwise, when you freeze something, it's not moving. So let's go ahead and snap our layout together again. So Control A, snap together. I'm perfectly free in a layout to add, again, what I call dumb shapes or dumb polygons. Polygons that have no model. But you might need them. Ground flood, your company logo, keep out region. The way you do that, if you follow my cursor to the left, we go to the Layout browser, and you now see the various drawing layers in this particular project. These were brought in by the library and have been set up by the person who wrote it. I'm going to go over here to Layer 1 and select the colored box. So we're ready to draw on that layer. I come down to the bottom to the Layout toolbar, select the rectangle, and draw, and I have drawn a polygon in the layout. If you select the shape and look down here at the bottom left, you will notice it gives the width, length, area, and the drawing layer, in this case Layer 1, it was drawn on. The third way that we can get something into layout, as I mentioned in the slide earlier, is bring in something from artwork cells. Artwork cells might be brought in because some vendor, for example, says here is your SMA footprint, or perhaps they say this is the spiral inductor layout, why don't you use this, etc. To bring in an artwork cell, you're in the Layout browser, again at the upper left, Cell Libraries, right-click, and you can import DXF or GDS. We already have a layout cell library here that came with this library. I'm going to click right on the library, not on an individual cell. When I click right on the library, you see the cells listed in the bottom part of the Layout browser. I'm going to grab one, bring it into my layout, and I have just added it. Grab one, bring it into my layout, and I've added it. So you actually can add layout cells up into the schematic layout, which is probably typically what you're going to want to do. We're now ready to send our schematic layout out to the outside world, either to your other layout people or perhaps to a board house, whatever your particular design and manufacturing flow is at your company. How do we do that? Well, we need an export mapping for the layout. And the way to find that is, again, under the Layout browser, follow my cursor to the upper top. This particular library has what we call an LPF file, Layout Process File, called AWR Module Rogers 4003. And if I double click on that, I get this coming up. The LPF file is the brains behind layout. It's actually where the units are, all the drawing layers, you can see them here listed. They have names, they have colors, they have patterns. You can add new drawing layers relatively easily if you wish to. We're going to work with the export mapping, and up here it says File Export Mappings. There's already a Gerber mapping. I'm going to right-click New DXF Mapping. Let's give it some name like Board. On the left are all the drawing layers in the first column. Anything drawn has to be on one of those drawing layers. The second column has what the external world is going to see. So for example, if you're shipping out to AutoCAD, maybe the AutoCAD people don't want layer 1. They want to call this M1. And so when they get the layout, it will be on layer M1. The checkboxes mean if the layer is exported. You probably don't want them seeing your errors, EM symbols, etc. You get the layout file configured. We hit OK, and we're ready to go. Select the layout. You have to be in the layout. Go up to the Layout menu, Export. The menu comes up. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to select Board Hierarchical and give it a name like mystub.dxf. Why don't we just call that stub? And we save it. Incidentally, you can export as hierarchical or flat. If you don't know what hierarchical means, it's exactly the same as in a schematic you have subcircuits. It's more efficient. Normally you would use this. Sometimes you do want to export flat, maybe to an external EM simulator. And we hit save, and that's it. The DXF file has been created and is sent out to your various layout tools and layout people.